Ladies and gentlemen, not every battle is fought on a battlefield. Some are fought in the silence of the mind, in the hidden corridors of thought, where the enemy does not wield a sword but a whisper. And if that whisper takes root, it does not need chains to bind us. It has already won. Today I speak not of horned figures lurking in shadows, but of influences so subtle we might mistake them for our own thoughts. Here are 5 signs that something beyond mere human weakness is at work in your mind right now. Evil does not come crashing through the door. It does not shout commands or demand your loyalty outright. That would be too obvious, too easy to resist. Instead, it speaks in a voice so familiar that you mistake it for your own. It does not tell you to abandon what is good, it simply nudges you to reconsider, to hesitate. It plants a question, a subtle doubt. Are you sure? And then it lets you do the rest. Consider how the greatest betrayals, the worst regrets, never begin with a single decisive moment, but with a slow shifting of the mind. A whispered suggestion here, a small compromise there. It's not a big deal. No one will notice, everyone else does it. At first, the changes are imperceptible, like walking into a dimly lit room where your eyes slowly adjust to the dark. Before long, what once seemed unthinkable feels natural. This is how darkness works. It does not force you, it invites you. It does not demand, it persuades. It wraps itself in reason, in pragmatism, even in virtue. It might sound like caution when it is actually fear. It might appear as righteous anger when it is really growing resentment. It is subtle, patient, insidious. And by the time you realize that something has changed, it no longer feels like an outside force, it feels like you. The question is not whether you have heard the whisper. You have. We all have. The question is whether you recognize it for what it is before it becomes a roar. There is a kind of hopelessness that disguises itself as wisdom. It does not scream or panic, it simply settles in like a quiet certainty. It tells you that you see the world more clearly than others, that those who still believe in goodness, in redemption, in beauty are naive. It wants you to mistake disillusionment for intelligence, to believe that the only real truth is a bitter one. And once you accept this, it tightens its grip. At first, it feels like insight. You begin to believe that nothing truly changes, that every act of kindness is ultimately self-serving, that people are motivated only by greed or fear. You start to scoff at hope, not because you despise it, but because you see it as childish. You tell yourself you are being realistic, but realism without hope is just another word for surrender. The danger is that once you give in to this voice, you stop resisting. If nothing matters, why fight for what is good? If no one is truly kind, why bother being kind yourself? And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to play the very role you once despised. You become the cold, detached figure who cannot be reached, who cannot be moved, who cannot be convinced that love or truth still have power. This is not wisdom. This is a strategy. It is the voice of something that fears your hope more than anything else. Because hope, even the smallest flicker of it, is a light. And light has a way of exposing lies. The moment you recognize this trap, you weaken it. The moment you refuse to let despair pass itself off as truth, you begin to reclaim your mind. Love is the most powerful force in the world, which is why it is the easiest to twist. No one is tempted by raw malice or pure hatred. That would be too obvious, too easy to reject. Instead, the corruption begins with love, not its absence, but its distortion. It starts when we cling too tightly to what is ours. When we defend what we love so fiercely that we begin to see others as threats. At first it seems noble. You believe you are protecting your family, your country, your beliefs. You tell yourself that your anger is justified, that your harshness is necessary. You begin to see those who disagree with you not as mistaken, but as dangerous. The idea of patience feels weak. The thought of forgiveness feels foolish. And so, little by little, love turns into something unrecognizable. It becomes a weapon instead of a gift. This is how good people come to justify cruelty. They do not wake up one morning and decide to become callous or vengeful. They simply believe in their hearts that they are fighting for something important. They think they are being strong. But true strength does not require the destruction of others. It does not demand that we harden ourselves until we can no longer recognize our own reflection. The great deception is that evil convinces us we are doing what is right while leading us further into darkness. It whispers that love must be defended at any cost, even if that cost is our own kindness, our own humility. And by the time we realize what has happened, we find that the love we were fighting for has been replaced with something else entirely. No one is tempted by obvious evil. The truly dangerous lies do not come dressed in darkness, but in the colors of virtue. They take what is good, justice, loyalty, strength, even faith, and push it just far enough to make it destructive. They do not ask you to reject truth, only to hold on to a version of it so rigidly that you refuse to see anything else. They do not tell you to abandon mercy, only to prioritize fairness so ruthlessly that forgiveness feels like weakness. They do not demand you give up kindness, only that you become realistic enough to ignore it when it is inconvenient. This is how small compromises turn into great failures. You do not notice it happening at first, because nothing seems wrong. You are still standing for what is good. Only now, you see fewer and fewer people as worthy of it. Your anger feels righteous. Your resentment feels justified. You start believing that the ends will always justify the means. And so, without realizing it, you step onto a path that looks nothing like the one you first set out on. This is the most insidious trick of all, not to make us love what is evil, but to make us pursue the good in such a way that we lose sight of its very nature, to convince us that protecting what is right matters more than living it out, to make us believe that if we fight hard enough, we are allowed to become cruel, that if our cause is just, our hearts do not need to be. And by the time we see the truth, we may find that we have won our battles but lost ourselves. Darkness rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with a crash or a scream, but with a slow fading, a dulling of the senses, a quiet loss that you do not notice at first. It begins when joy feels harder to reach, when gratitude becomes an effort rather than a reflex. The things that once filled you with wonder now seem distant, unimportant. Beauty does not move you the way it once did. Hope feels like something for other people. This is not just exhaustion or a passing mood. It is a strategy. It is the slow dimming of the light so that you forget what it ever looked like. It is easier to lead someone into despair if they no longer remember what it means to feel alive. If laughter feels hollow, if love feels like a memory, if every day begins to look the same, then something is working against you. And it does not need to convince you of anything, it only needs you to stop noticing. This is why gratitude is so dangerous to the enemy, not because it is sentimental or naive, but because it is defiant. To take even a moment to recognize beauty, to express thanks for something simple, is to push back against the fog. It is to remind yourself that there is more to this life than survival, more than cynicism, more than just making it through another day. The moment you remember that goodness exists, that it still reaches for you even in the smallest ways, the spell begins to break. Because darkness does not need you to serve it, it only needs you to forget what the light looks like. If any of these signs feel familiar, do not be alarmed. The battle for the mind is not new, nor is it unwinnable. The whispers of despair, of resentment, of forgetfulness, these are old tricks and they only have power when they go unnoticed. The moment you recognize them, the moment you call them by name, their hold begins to weaken. The enemy works in subtlety, not because it is strong, but because it is afraid. It fears your hope, your joy, your ability to choose kindness when bitterness would be easier. It knows that even the smallest act of gratitude, the faintest flicker of light, can unravel its entire hold. This is why the fight is not won in great gestures, but in the quiet decisions of everyday life, the choice to reject despair, to let go of anger, to see beauty when the world insists it is gone. Do not let the enemy convince you that you are powerless. The fact that you can still hear the whisper means you are still in control. And as long as you can choose, as long as you can defy the lie and embrace the truth, you are not defeated. Because darkness does not need to destroy you, it only needs you to surrender. And the moment you refuse, the moment you stand firm and reclaim your mind, it has already lost.